Okay, we're gonna go over some research on ageism. Ageism in the for the COVID conspiracies. And hopefully this will get past the YouTube algorithms. So I found a fascinating research. Basically, I was just researching a Substack, or there was a new article saying that the pandemic was a scam because the older people just die from normal disease, and it wasn't really from the pandemic. Well, so according to the research, 80 to 90% of the deaths from the pandemic were people over 65 years old. And the reason is that as the pandemic uses the ACE2 receptor to get into the body, older people have a compromised immune system, which is based on your epigenetics. And so that's what ends up causing the higher death rate for the elderly. But what's fascinating is that when you look at the percentage of death from the pandemic compared to normal death rate, it actually turned out to be the same as people who are not elderly, who are under 65%. It was only slightly higher from the pandemic for the elderly, meaning the ratio of pandemic deaths to non-pandemic deaths in the general population and the elderly. So even though 80 to 90% of the deaths were caused by the pandemic, were the elderly in the pandemic, their rate of death from the pandemic was only slightly higher than non-pandemic related deaths compared to the general population. And even more fascinatingly, once the elderly got vaccinated, then their death rate from the pandemic was actually less than the general population, which proves that the vaccination was very effective. But it also proves that that's why it's so easy for the non-elderly, especially relying on their cell phones and their one-finger rage algorithms, to then dismiss the pandemic as being fake. Now let's go into some of the other research on the background of the pandemic. Okay, so the deaths caused by the pandemic were more than people who died during World War II, and obviously World War II was a big deal. So it just goes to show that, it was a real pandemic. It was easy to be ageist when you have these other factors for the elderly causing death, and therefore their death rate was not much different than the general population, and so it was easy, in relation to the pandemic deaths. Okay, so that's what I was just talking about before. Now, here we have the pangolin bat dynamic has been confirmed as the wild source of the pandemic. And so people are quick to fixate on the biomedical research, but the fact is that due to the ecological crisis, we're having an increase in wildlife smuggling for food that's stolen out of rainforests, and the biodiversity is much, much higher in the equatorial rainforest, so you have much higher rate of deadly viruses that spread in the rainforest. And so they've done the genetic research, and they've figured out that indeed the source of the pandemic was from this bat pangolin dynamic that then spread into humans. And so you end up having this feedback between the bat, pangolin, and the human that led to the pandemic. So it was incubating in an intermediary animal like the pangolin for a relatively longer period of time. And then that, when you had the wildlife trade in pangolins that are endangered, so it's illegal. But then it spread to bats, and then between those three, the bats, humans, and the pangolins, that's how it developed. Because you had a greater diversity of COVIDs or the pandemic varieties in the pangolin. And so when you look at the pangolin, it's actually closer to the pandemic than the bats. Okay, so, and just to show you, I've been researching this for years. So there's been a lot of pangolins have the crucial cleavage site not found in bats. That's more background to that. And the furin cleavage site that allows faster replication in the respiratory tract. Now, a lot of people are like skeptical about the virus because they don't know biomedical research, which I worked in a biomedical research lab, but there's this website, Sorry Anti-Vaxxer, which documents people who were very outspoken against the vaccine, and then they ended up dying from the pandemic at a young age. These are, people who are under 65. And so then you have people on YouTube that are commenting on this information from the Sorry Anti-Vaxxer website. So basically, because the people were very outspoken and self-righteous about being against the vaccine, and then next thing you know, they're dying at a young age from the pandemic. So as I just showed, the elderly did survive even better than the general population once the elderly got vaccinated in ratio to their normal death rate. So here we have more on the pangolin as the intermediary. Pangolin COVID was detected in 17 out of the 25 Malaysian pangolins that we analyzed. Pangolin was captured in the Chinese Guangxi Customs Agency, so that's being illegally trafficked in. And so it uses the ACE2 receptor just like the pandemic spread because of that spike protein variation. So the pangolin COVID was 100% identity with SARS-CoV proteins in those proteins. So anyway, more proof. They've been researching this for quite a while. And why it doesn't get covered in the media, I don't know. Because people are, they want to fixate on humans in the biomedical research, but okay, so bat coronaviruses. Okay, extensive cross transmission between mammal and to animals on sale in markets. So here you have this cross dynamic between the bats and the pangolins. And so there you go. And what else do we got here? CDC surging. So this is the variations that are changing. Okay, so here they're using the cryogenic electron microscopy, which is anybody who doubts the existence of viruses, and especially the pandemic virus, then they need to watch this video. This is what my University of Minnesota, where I was an alumni from, this is what they used for detailing the the pandemic viruses, they use a cryogenic electron microscopy. So you can see they got this. I don't know why people don't know about this technology, because they're doesn't they want to keep people stupid with all these podcasts that are like Joe Rogan, but they have it all detailed about in the when you're using the 3D. You can get a 3D view of the RNA. So this is, I think that was from the University of Minnesota research. Here's how it works. Electron beam scans each protein, and then it projects it into a 3D. And you have to freeze it. That's why it's cryo. So the proteins are in ice. So then they're able to model everything and figure all the details. Okay, so here's where we get the. So here you get the 3D details of all the viruses. Here we go. So that's how they're able to track everything in detail with all the nucleotides. Here it is. Cryo electron microscopy. So they're able to see how it changes in time. So I don't know why people they don't want to learn the science, behind the pandemic, but that proves that they know the details of the RNA viruses. Okay, so to get more details on the cryo electron. Okay, so that's pretty much all I wanted to say, is that it's easy to be ageist about the pandemic because the rate of death from non from the pandemic in relation to non-pandemic causes is about the same or lower than the total than the younger, less than 65 years old. So it's easy to just dismiss it as because most people aren't interacting with the elderly. So 3 of the 4 amino acids that constitute the furan cleavage site are of natural zoonotic origin. So they've proven that the pandemic was of natural origin. Okay, go drink some water.